Hello and welcome to S108, Resource Management. So why are you receiving a block of instruction on resource management? The Army requires a high level of readiness to support global demands. The resource process is our Army's center of gravity for its business operations. Without the right people, the proper equipment, and adequate dollars to support it all, our Army would not be able to fulfill its duty to the nation. It is everyone's responsibility to manage our resources across our formation responsibly. The objective is getting the biggest bang for the buck. These key takeaways will help you focus on the most critical aspects of this lesson. You have already been introduced to the 5 basic appropriations or colors of money in F107 when we talked about PPBE. Operations and maintenance appropriations pay for the day-to-day expenses of DoD components in garrison and during exercises, deployments, and military operations. However, there are threshold dollar limitations for certain types of expenditures, such as the purchases of major end items of equipment and construction of permanent facilities. Once expended, O&M accounts may be replenished for specific operations through supplemental appropriations from Congress and reprogramming actions. MPA is used for pay, allowances, individual clothing, subsistence, interest on deposits, gratuities, and permanent change of station travel, including all expenses for organizational movements, for members of the Army on active duty status. MPA is generally available for 1 fiscal year and is centrally managed and funded. MPA also pays for Class 1 support, such as dining facilities, meals ready to eat, and bottled water. Although OMA funds day-to-day operations, OPA is typically used for centrally managed items or systems that are considered investment items, requiring the use of OPA funds regardless of cost, or the cost of individual components. This includes large pieces of equipment or systems that exceed the expense or investment threshold, or is the purpose of some other major procurement account, such as aircraft or shipbuilding. OPA is used to provide MTO equipment for operational capabilities in Army units. OPA funds major end item investments and or table of authorization equipment to provide core capabilities to Army units. This is 3-year money. RDT&E provides the development, engineering, design, purchase, fabrication or modification of end items, weapons, equipment, or other materiel. This is not an appropriation that is normally used in theater by Army deployed units unless involved in the research, development, acquisition, and testing process. RDT&E funding is available for 2 years. MILCON provides for the acquisition of land and construction of buildings for which authorizing legislation is required. Congressional oversight of military construction is extensive. Specific approval is required for any project above an established dollar threshold. Funds for these large construction projects require specific congressional approval and are provided in the annual Specified Military Construction Program. Of course, none of these monies are available until the President signs the authorization bill and the appropriations bill. In F107, we talked about the POM-BES. The BES, which is the first year of the POM-BES, forms the basis of the base budget. The base budget is the ongoing funding used to keep a military department functioning. Departments use the base budget when planning for more than 12 months at a time. The U.S. Department of Defense starts with a base budget each year. Then it adds additional spending for wars and other contingencies. Overseas contingency operations funding pays for wars and overseas operations. It is not an official part of the budget. It is also not subject to sequestration. All appropriations passed by Congress have restrictions. Just keep in mind that every dollar is restricted with respect to its purpose, the time in which you must spend that dollar, and the amount that can be spent. Time. Most appropriations have a period of availability. You cannot obligate funds before the appropriation bill is passed. Funds must be obligated before they expire. Once obligated, disbursement may be made before or after expired, but before closed or canceled. Appropriations close 5 years after they expire. Purpose. The bottom line here is that monies must only be obligated for the category or color for which it was appropriated. You can't pay salaries with construction funds or use R&D money to buy new equipment. There's a little bit of flexibility built into OMA dollars, but for the most part, you must use the right color of money for the purpose defined within the appropriation bill. Amount. The obligation and expenditure must be within the amounts that Congress has appropriated. This is perhaps the easiest restriction to understand. If you have $100 in the piggy bank, you can't spend $101 on a new stereo. People get into trouble when underestimating their expenses or failing to keep track of their unit budget. The purpose of this slide is to talk about how money flows from Congress to the unit level. In a perfect world, Congress passes the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, and the MILCON Act, and appropriations bills. The President signs them into law. OMB apportions funds to departments like DoD or Department of State, Homeland Security, and so on. DoD apportions funds to services like the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. The Department of the Army allocates funds to ACOMs, ASCCs, DRUs, and field operating agencies. This is a formal allocation. These agencies cannot go over their allocation at the end of the year. If they do, this becomes an anti-deficiency violation. In this diagram, we have an example using FORSCOM. FORSCOM now allots to its subordinates. This is an informal allotment. 3 Corps allots to its divisions. Divisions allot to brigades. Brigades to battalions. Informal simply means that if a battalion or BCT spends more than it was given to them by hire, then hire can cover them by reallocating money within the organization. This only works if they have the money. So if a battalion overspends, the BCT can cover them. If they are out of money, then they will go to the division for reallocation. As long as there is money available within the informal chain, the overspending or violation of the allotment is covered, and FORSCOM is off the hook. While not exact, the slide here depicts the various O&M funding that a typical division might receive. So the purpose of this slide is to draw distinctions between funding types within OMA and articulate that certain fund types within OMA can only be used to purchase certain items or are coded for certain units. The IBCTs, shown here, share from the same pot or bag of funding. This makes it important for the IBCTs not to spend more than what has been allotted to them. Otherwise, they are spending funds from one of their fellow IBCTs. The CAB doesn't have to worry about a fellow unit using their funding because their pot or bag is specifically coded for them. The CAB just has to ensure that they don't commingle their flying hour program, FHP, expenditures and their home station training, HST, expenditures. CTC funding gets pushed to the division based on what brigades are on the CTC schedule for that particular year. Also, the division may receive funding to conduct a warfighter exercise if one is scheduled for the division within the fiscal year. The Division Sustainment Brigade will receive two funding types. The 112 or 112 is used to fund requirements associated with its headquarters. Think internal requirements to the DSB. The 113 fund is for requirements down to trace units that provide external support to the entire division. Of note, the 112 funding is shared with the DIVARTY in the same manner that all IBCTs share 111. Finally, a division may also receive some specialized funding. SHARP and language training are a couple of examples. Most of you will already be familiar with the Government Purchase Card, or GPC. XOs are often the approving or certifying official for battalion GPC cards. Make sure that you attend the mandatory training before assuming GPC duties. Ensure that the cardholders also attend the training. There are strict rules and restrictions for using the card. If assigned additional duty as an approving authority, the XO certifies that every purchase is legitimate. It is extremely important that the approving authority know the prohibitions to using the GPC card. Know expenditure limits and do not exceed them. Do not try to work around monetary limits by spreading your purchases out over several months. There are a lot of ways to get in trouble with the GPC, such as split purchases. Don't hesitate to consult your S8 or JAG if you are in doubt. Make sure to understand what a contract is. Remember that only warranted contracting officers, or KOs, have the authority to procure goods and services from commercial vendors for requirements that are beyond what a GPC card allows. A MIPR is like a contract. However, instead of an agreement between the government and a commercial entity, the agreement is between two government entities. Some of you may have served as a paying agent. You may be familiar with agent funds and when they can be used. These monies can be used when your unit is deployed or in the field without access to normal military supply sources. Field ordering officers and paying agents, FOOs and PAs, need to be soldiers who are detail-oriented and can be trusted with cash. It is important that units identify the number of soldiers and the right types of soldiers that should be appointed for FOO/PA duty prior to deploying. There are several requirements that may be significantly easier to do in garrison before you deploy or go to the field for a long time. Both GCSS-Army and GFEBS are ERPs, or Enterprise Resource Planning Solutions. These systems are auditable and able to interface with each other seamlessly. This slide shows the two systems and purpose of each. It also explains the parts and supply requisition process. ZPARC is within the GCSS-Army system. It is a place where comptrollers place money from GFEBS and the S4 channels place parts and supply orders. If done correctly, the S8 and S4 coordinate to ensure that the correct amount of money is available in a timely manner for the required parts. Money should not sit in GCSS-Army for long periods of time, nor should parts that are awaiting funding. So suppose that a soldier determines that the company needs some pens and rubber bands. The company XO validates the requirements and submits the list to the battalion or squadron XO. The battalion S4 reviews the list to ensure that it doesn't exceed their budget allocation and is within regulations. Once validated, the battalion XO approves on a memorandum with his or her signature. The list is then sent to the Brigade XO for approval and verification. The Brigade XO and the Brigade S8 verify the request and availability of funds. The approved list is sent back down to the battalion or squadron level to input orders into ZPARC. The Brigade S8 receives the approved PR numbers from the battalion. Orders are posted in ZPARC by the S8. The company, battery, or troop receives the ordered items, and that's it. Really simple, right? This slide shows the importance of the relationship between the S8, S4, and S3. They must be tied in to ensure requirements are validated and funded to meet mission success. The S8 accomplishes its mission based on guidance from the brigade commander for command and control purposes and the Division G8 for technical guidance. The S8 is part of the brigade staff, along with the usual cast of characters, S1, S2, and so on. The S8 is not a subcomponent of the S4. The S8, S4, and S3 work together to plan and resource requirements to support the mission. When building your unit's budget, it is best to spread out your requirements in a manner that aligns with your unit operational calendar. Some training is funded outside of your organization, such as NTC or schools. Ask the question to the appropriate office or point of contact to validate who is paying the bill. Units need to understand if a training event is paid for with unit funds or from another entity. For example, NTC has some funds available for units. However, units must also spend some of their own money. The S8, or Resource Management Officer, RMO, can tell you your cost categories, such as supplies, TDY, travel, or transportation, but not necessarily the costs for an FTX. That information stems from the requirements of your training exercise. As a field grade leader, you must understand what factors impact your training budget and adjust as necessary. If your forecasted costs exceed your budget, you may need to fight for more dollars. There's usually a bit of wiggle room, but it is up to you to do your homework to justify these costs. Remember that red line that you saw on an earlier slide? There are things that you can control, and there's things that you can't control. You can turn off a contract, but once your supply clerk and maintenance tech orders it, it clears ZPARC and the money is spent. The same thing applies with Army PME schools. The Army pays for most of the cost, but the units may pay some if they want rental cars and other accommodations. This slide helps to break down some of the things that units spend their money on. MTO units spend most of their money on sustainment-related things like supplies and maintenance. TDA units spend most of their cash on TDY and contracts. These are expenses within the base budget. But how do we acquire unfunded requirements? You probably have heard about unfunded requirements, or UFRS. Make reasonable requests and have your requirements endorsed by the chain of command. Get the XO, S4, S8, and most importantly, the commander to support and validate your UFR. Take the time to write clear, well-thought-out justifications that are tied to your command's mission, higher headquarters priorities, and readiness. Not all UFRs receive funding. What may be a UFR at the battalion or brigade level may not be at the division or higher level. An example might be that division may be able to internally fund the requirement, so it won't go higher for approval. One important factor in getting your UFR approved is being prepared and doing your homework ahead of time. You can certainly improve your bargaining position by freeing up money that is tied up in TDY, contracts, and supply requisitions. Budget planning is a deliberate planning event. It should not be done on the fly. The relationship between the S8, S3, and S4 is very important. The S8 funds validated requirements. The S3 and S4 validate the requirements through the chain of command. All meetings, not just budget meetings, should include all three major players. Budgets are updated in coordination with the training calendar. If there is an update to the calendar, that the budget must follow. Prioritizing requirements is also important to ensure that funds are available for critical requirements throughout the year. Failing to involve the entire staff in the budget process can lead to failing to resource critical events and training. How does the XO and the S8 keep the commander out of trouble? This begins with information and communication. The S8 has access to information and reports, such as the ones listed on the slide. The S8 can pull the status of funds from GFEBS at any time. This report shows obligation rates. At the beginning of the fourth quarter, the law mandates that overall major commands, such as FORSCOM, must be obligated at 80%. This is an average of all subordinate units' obligation rates. Some funds may have been allocated for contracts, but the KO hasn't yet awarded contracts. If the KO doesn't award contracts by September 30th, the organization loses the funds. Keep track of unliquidated obligations. For example, a cleaning contract has been awarded. The contractor has completed work, and the final bill amount is less than the contract award amount. The unit needs to be able to deobligate residual funds prior to September 30th so that the unit does not lose buying power. The S4 plays a significant role in managing the budget by monitoring unit supply discipline. Don't accidentally obligate the government for money when you do not have the proper authority. Remember that only a KO can legally bind the government in a commercial contract. So we've highlighted several considerations related to resource management. Resource management is a team sport. It is everyone's responsibility to manage our resources wisely to support the mission.